Now!
What? What now? Now it's on television now, me? What now? It's you? Well, then I haven't got a coat or it's not. Wait a second, don't move nothing. Wait, I'll get a coat. Don't run. What now? I'm on, yeah?
Lights, camera, action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Film2Table, and today we are going to interview our seventh guest for the project. Here with me is George Huang, a director, screenwriter, and professor at UCLA. How are you today, George?
Good, Juliana. Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. Let's dive into the first question.
I've been doing this for 30 years, and 30 years ago, there was maybe, yeah, like I had told you in a previous conversation, there were like two Asians, in all of the Paramount lot. And so I would always get confused for Teddy Z, who was a VP of production there and somebody who would buy scripts and could greenlight your project, whereas I was just a lowly reader and assistant, and people would like, yell at me from across the parking lot. I was leave for the day. Hey, Teddy, Teddy, and run up to me. And then the look of disappointment was like, oh, yeah, you're not Teddy. It's like,
Uh,
so,
yeah,
um, but it has changed quite a bit. I was at Netflix just a couple weeks ago, and two of the three executives who were pitching in the room were Asian, and that is something I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
yeah,
So I think we are making great steps, to sort of like representation, across the board. In terms of telling sort of those deeply personal stories, what would recommend to writers is tell the deeply personal side of it. Yes, absolutely incorporate the details of, yeah, your household, your culture, your ethnicity, but, you know, don't make it sort of, don't lead with it. It just has to be organic, yeah, because, in screenwriting, we have this sort of phrase, the more specific you get, the more general it is with audiences. There's going to be some aspect of your story that is going to resonate with somebody profoundly, even though they are not Asian or they're
yeah.
not, Latino or, yeah, or what have you. But if you try to just, I'm going to tell an Asian story, then you're sort of like putting it in a box already, and you're already signifying to an audience, well, you're not going to understand this unless you're Asian. But if I just tell you, like, hey, I'm going to tell you my story and what it was like, dealing with my mom's disapproval over my career and life choices, a lot of people can relate to that. Yeah, is it a uniquely Asian story? You know, maybe, I face a little more pressure than other, people would from their parents, but it is, a story that resonates across the board, regardless of where you're at, where you're from. Yeah, the idea that you want to please your parents somehow is, a universal one, even though it is very specific to me. And I can sort of couch it in the terms of, being an Asian male, the eldest male in my family, their expectations, their pressures,
Yeah.
but that general thought of, hey, I just want to make my parents happy, is something that resonates, I think, with a lot of audiences.
Also, I have another follow-up question. So, throughout your career, would you say that over time, as you created more films and have done more projects, you've kind of represented that message that you were just telling me, where you wanted to show representation, but make sure that it wasn't just kind of grouped it for one specific, race. It was more of a story that can be resonated with everyone, however, still represented. What specifically have you done that has shown that perspective?
Well, the hardest part is just being able to get, sort of, yeah, minority representation in the room, whether it's behind the camera or in front of camera. I remember, when I started out, Justin Lin had made his movie, his first film, Better Luck Tomorrow. And I was doing a panel at the Directors Guild, and the entire cast of Better Luck Tomorrow came down and sort of confronted me at the panel about how come you didn't have any Asians in your first movie. And I counted them as like, I tried. I told my cast director, please find me some Asian actors that can put in front of the camera, and none
Hmm.
of you showed up for the audition. So how are we going to fix it? Where is that, where's that disconnect where, all of you want to be acting, but yet I'm not, you're not coming to these auditions or you're not, getting the word out. So, you know, we had a long conversation about that. And, the idea is like, look, I can be, expend as much effort, but it's a two-way street. You know what I mean? It's not like just because you're Asian, I'm going to put you in the movie. You have to expend some effort too.
Yeah.
So you have to seek those movies out. You have to seek those filmmakers out. And, it's kind of like what you've been doing. You reach out to filmmakers that you're interested in talking to, and, we're going to develop a relationship as a result of this. And that's going to be, something that you can rely on, moving forward, with whatever it is you choose to do with your career.
Yeah.
But if you have this notion that you're just going to be, sitting around and, you're going to be discovered, but yeah, that is never going to happen. You have to put yourself out there. And so, yeah, so, that was 30 years ago when, it was just hard to get anyone in the room. And now 30 years later, we are in sort of this incredible age of diversity and equity and inclusion. But I do worry sometimes that, some of us are being put in the room, sort of a pro forma virtue signaling aspect of it.
Mhm.
Well, let's just hire George because he's Asian. And it's like, well, what do you want? What do you want me to do with the character? It's like, I don't know, just make him Asian. It's like, well, okay, that's, yeah, that is not a great sort of note
Yeah.
to give, a storyteller. It's like, what does that even mean to you? What does that mean to a story? It just doesn't make sense sometimes. And so a lot of times, you feel like, okay, yeah, I'm not being hired, for my talents or what I can
Yeah.
bring to the table, but I'm being hired for because I check a box. That's almost even more insulting than not hiring me at all. So.
Exactly. You're like
So
seen as
it
a
sort of puts that
token.
into the walk. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So, yeah, so I don't know what the right answer is. I just sort of,
Mhm.
look, I just want to, keep working, keep doing, the story. I want to tell the stories I want to tell. And, hopefully, that intersection of being hired by Hollywood and, the studios, lines up with the stories that I want to tell. That's the best
Yeah.
that you can hope.
Were you referring to your film Swimming with Sharks? Was that the film where it was you were
That was a
trying?
first film. Yes, exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
Got
And
it.
yeah, sadly, yeah. I mean, the cast of Better Luck Tomorrow was right. There were no Asians, in
Yeah.
that movie. And yeah, despite like, hey, can we get some Asian extras? Can we, hire, one of the assistants, and the casting director's like, I'm putting out a call for Asian actors, and none of the agencies have any. You know,
Hmm.
my second, film right after that was a film I did for HBO, and it said we need to hire Asian actors, and no one would come in. Eventually, I, just reached out to a friend, you know, who was a playwright. He'd given up acting, but I said, oh, you know, please just come, Michael, just please come, just do this little role. I need to put in an Asian face. Otherwise I do not want, Asian actors coming to another panel and like, and cornering me in a dark alley, so I
Hmm.
need to put an Asian face up there. And so, reluctantly say, okay, fine, I'll come and do it. But yeah, but none of them showed up for an audition. I had to cast someone who did not want to act, but he did to me as a favor, so yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, I think we have come a long way. We're seeing a lot more Asian faces on the screen. There are shows now that are entirely set in that sort of Asian diaspora, whether, it's something like Miss Marvel or American Born Chinese or Hulu just released Interior Chinatown. It's great. It's fantastic. So there's signs of hope, knock on wood,
Yeah.
that, yeah, there's going to be
Mhm.
room for all of these stories to be told.
I've talked to a lot of different filmmakers who kind of have um a negative outlook on Hollywood because they've seen like the dark side of it. And I was going to ask, based on your progress in your career, would you say that Hollywood is going, in a better direction as it differing from how it was, many years ago? And
Right.
would you say that independent filmmakers and Hollywood filmmakers will one day maybe see more eye to eye as maybe
Uh-huh.
there's some tension right now? But yeah,
Right.
that's my question.
Well, I think the idea of independent filmmaking and Hollywood filmmaking, big studio filmmaking is always going to be, two different camps, and you have to decide, you can work in both, one does not preclude the other. But yeah, I mean, ideally, look, you would want to have all the resources of a big studio behind you, to tell the story. But most of the time, they're not going to do that. They're not going to pony up the millions that you need to make a story. But if you really, really are passionate about telling that story, about making that movie, you'll find a way to get it done no matter what. And that means, okay, well, how can we do it for cheaper? And so that is always, sort of the problem that every filmmaker faces in Hollywood. There's never enough money. There's never enough time. In terms of is it getting better? Well, you have to be a little more like, what is the metric that we're sort of measuring it by? Is it by like, is it about like, the how attitudes are in Hollywood? Because yeah, you could say, look, when I started out 30 years ago, yeah, I mean, like I made a movie called So Many Sharks that was about how abusive, the system is in Hollywood to sort of underlings and assistants.
Yeah.
Has that improved? Absolutely. You cannot get away with, like 10% of the stuff that, my old bosses used to do to me. They just don't do that anymore. You can't, but the reason they can't do that anymore is because, a lot of these studios are now owned by major conglomerates and major corporations that have, human resource departments, compliance officers, they have to answer to higher authorities. Now, the flip side to that is there are now giant corporations, who only care about, the bottom line, the profit margin, and the idea of being creative is not a high priority to them. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So have things gotten worse in terms of studio system? Yeah, I would say things have gotten worse because, we've seen in the news, major studios like Warner Brothers, Legacy Studio. I mean, they're shelving movies that they spent $100 million on, like, Batgirl, that will never see the light of day, simply because it's more beneficial to take a tax write down. Now, I get that on a numbers sort of basis, but 30 years ago, people who owned studios, their creative pride was on the line. They had some ownership over movies and they cared about, what movies went out there with the Warner Brothers name and stamp on it. And so the idea that, anyone would just take a movie and throw it away in the garbage simply to take a tax write-off, that would never even be considered 30 years ago. That'd be a cardinal sin, in the movie business. But nowadays, yeah, it's just like, yeah, Warner Brothers has done it twice already. So yeah, and yeah. So so there are things that are getting better, but there are things that are also getting worse at the same time.
Yeah. I can tell also just based on talking to different people, it seems as if the storytelling paradigm has shifted almost like,
Right.
for example, I mean, a lot of people, just my friends and family members, the types of movies that they really love and appreciate are more from, you know, from back in the day when stories were more like, I guess, original, and now there's so many things coming out that it's almost as if, people are just trying to get a check at this point. But
Right.
again, I don't know. We have a new generation coming,
Yeah.
emerging, and
Right.
stories change all the time. So,
What's
uh,
interesting to hear someone of your youth and generation feel it, because like, look, I feel the same way. I think a lot of these, movies and TV shows that I'm seeing in streamers is like, okay, that is a watered down version of an older idea that could have been told in 2 hours, but why you're taking 10 hours now to tell it, I don't understand, And then part of me feels like, oh, because you're just the old grumpy guy. And, and having seen a lot of movies and TV shows, I can always point back to, okay, well, that is just, a watered down version of this movie, or that's like this TV show from, 1985 or something like that. But it's interesting to hear someone like you who has not had exposure to like network TV from 1985 feel the same way about the content that you're getting from a lot of streamers now. So yeah,
yeah.
I do feel that yeah, we are hitting a point where we're getting completely saturated. It seems like it's a more of an arms race to try to put as many hours as they possibly can without worrying about the quality of it. It's more about the quantity. And I think that, yeah, that's going to backfire because people will just tune out or it won't become a priority for them anymore to sort of
Mhm.
renew their subscription because like, they'll think, yeah, what's the last thing I saw that I really liked? Nah, I could do something better with my time and money.
Also, a lot of people have now just been so addicted to social media, and you can
Yeah.
watch things on social
Yeah.
media. So, I mean, sometimes I'm just scrolling on TikTok and I see um full-on movies of
Yeah.
random things
No,
there.
yeah, that's another thing that's sort of strange is like everybody's, attention span, they can only watch things in under 2 minutes. The idea like, yeah, I was talking to someone at Paramount and they released the original Lindsay Lohan Mean Girls on TikTok 30 seconds at a time. And to me, that would be maddening. It's like, how could anyone watch that? That would drive me nuts. Every 30 seconds, okay, stop, load the next episode. But, he was saying, yeah, no, people are drawn to it. I mean, there's a whole new segment of what they call vertical shows of like TV series that are designed to be watched on your phone at like 90-second clips. so each episode only lasts 90 seconds. And I
Yeah.
thought, when a student was telling me about this, I was like, that's horrible. I like, no one's ever going to buy that. It's like, well, I've sold three of them and I've made like 500,000 and they're asking for more. So clearly there's an audience that's go, oh my God, you're right. There is. So yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There are
I mean,
always going to be people who really like that type of stuff. There's always
ex-
people who like it and people who don't. So,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yep.
yeah.
So, yeah, so it's been my, sort of experience that, as an action film fan as well, you know, the action itself isn't the exciting part, even though that's the stuff that you always see in commercials and trailers, the big explosions, the gunfights, the car chases, that looks sexy, that looks cool. But at the end of the day, it's just all white noise unless you care about your characters. If you care about your characters, you care, oh my God, is Luke Evans or Sung Kang going to walk away from this? If you have fallen in love with the characters in the story, then you're going to be engaged regardless of how big or how small the action is. So one of the things we did in Weekend Taipei, so usually sort of the action genre paradigm is like, so I used to work for the producer Joel Silver, who in his heyday was the action man. He produced Die Hard, he produced Lethal Weapon, all these like action franchises. And he would do what was called a whammo chart. And so the idea is like every 10 pages, there has to be a whammo, to keep the audience engaged. It's some beat of action.
Mhm.
And action has to escalate. So if you bring out a knife for the first whammo, then you better bring out a gun for the second whammo. And by the end, you better be blowing up half of downtown. So the idea that it's supposed to, continually get bigger. So that's a training I came from in the action world. And yeah, that's something we did originally in the Weekend Taipei script. And so the third act, the face off between, Luke Evans and Sung Kang was supposed to be this giant epic fest fight in the alleyways of, the Taipei night market, with like all sorts of like, we got, metal chopsticks, we got butcher cleavers, we got hot oil, from food stands, like, yeah, we composed this like ginormous, set piece. But we were shooting it in sort of the summer in Taipei, and summers there are brutal. I mean, it's hot, it's humid, and so I remember I was walking around with my co-writer and the producer Luc Besson, and we're just scouting locations, and like 5 minutes and like walking one block, like we're just drenched in sweat, and we're going, oh my God, how are we going to do this? The crew is going to die, the cast is going to die. And we happened to walk by a movie theater, and I joked to him, "Hey, wouldn't it be funny? Wouldn't it be great if we could just like shoot in that air-conditioned movie theater?" And he looked at me and goes, "Well, why can't we?" We go, "Well, you want the action to be bigger. You want, a movie theater, just two guys fighting in a movie theater. Yeah, there's not much you can do with that. Out here we got all this stuff." And he goes, "No, no, no. Nobody's going to care about that. The action is almost perfunctory. They just want to see who's going to prevail." And yeah, and he was right. So our third act action scene, and this is coming off of, we blow up a hotel room. We've got gunfights, car chase, all that type of stuff. It's a simple fist fight in front of a movie screen. And honestly, it's one of the most cinematic experiences, that I've ever seen, simply because you're invested in both, the characters that Luke Evans and Sung Kang play, that you want to see how this turns out. And yeah, and it really, emotionally resonates with the audience because, we've built up to this moment. And yeah, it's small. It's just two guys fighting, fist to fist in front of a movie screen, but still there's something really elegant and nice about it.
You got to make sure you have that like original spin to it so it's not, like every other movie, every other action movie.
Exactly. Yeah, it was funny because it was like, talking to my like car guy and also my stunt guy. And, they basically said, George, you're not going to do anything new, that you're not going to reinvent the wheel. Anything you come up was probably done 100 times before. The only thing that's going to matter is, are we going to care about the characters? Are we going to care what happens next? So
When is it coming out of theaters?
I'm sorry.
When is the movie out of theaters?
So it is actually out of theaters now. So it
Okay.
opened 3 weeks ago. Unfortunately, did not do well. We didn't have a lot of marketing behind it. So, but it is available now on PVOD, on Amazon, Apple, Fandango, your usual sort of outlets. You can rent it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll check it out. I'll watch it and I'll email you what I thought.
Yeah. See if the theory holds up. If, you may write back and go, yeah, I think I would like the third act back in the alleys. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of that, look, It's the first movie I ever wrote and directed, and they always say write what you know. And yeah, look, I mean, having spent like 8 years as an assistant, that's the world I knew. All my friends were assistants to other producers, and so we'd get together and compare horror stories, what our bosses would do to us each day. And so, yeah, that was born really out of just personal experience, and so that was yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so a lot of it was true, but the message I was trying to get across because like everyone like looks at it and goes, oh, the horrible boss, all that type of stuff. But if you do a deep reading of the film, the assistant is actually complicit in all of it. I mean, because despite it, he's like talking about, oh, I just want to like make movies and be a good guy. He is just as ruthless and just as ambitious as his boss is. And ultimately, it's that ruthlessness and ambition that sort of puts him in this position, this uncompromising position, and puts him, you know, in that sort of very dark ending because he put himself there. No one forced him there, but it's sort of what was sort of a telling aspect. So when I wrote the script, I sent it to some friends to sort of like hey, what do you think about this? And I sent it to my old film school partner, and like he finally called back. He goes, okay, so I read your script. I go, and he goes, well, I got to tell you the truth. When you sent it to me, I really wanted to hate it because you have been such a dick for the last 2 years, but I gotta say, despite that, I think the script's really good. And so yeah, so it was sort of like this like weird thing, like having been indoctrinated into that system, I was becoming just like my bosses. I know my level was very short. I was kind of dismissive of a lot of people. Unless you were somebody important, I didn't want to give you the time of day. It's like fucking assistant. I don't have the right to do that. And so yeah, the fact that I was treating my friends like that, yeah, it was sort of like ooh, it was sort of a wake up call, and I think it was something that sort of came out in the script. The
Hmm.
idea that the assistant character played by Frank Whiteley is, he's making all the wrong choices. So for me, it was like a what if, like if I had decided to stay working in the studio system, this is what my life could have ended up being. And so
Oh
that was
yeah.
what I was imagining. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned about how these two characters, even though they seem like they're complete opposites, somehow
Mhm.
they're almost the same because they have
Yep.
the same like mindset. And
Exactly.
I think that's a good way to like think about how you want to like create distinct characters because you have to,
Right.
answer all those questions about the characters before, and some of them align with other characters that you may think do not seem the same yet are in some ways. So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, there's something in storytelling where, like, the idea that you want to sort of populate your story sometimes with mirror characters, that sort of like, help, an audience understand or, emphasize some of the character traits that you really want them to pick up. And then, sometimes you want to just hold a mirror up to your protagonist and say, okay, yeah, this is what you're becoming, so so there's many, uses for the idea of a mirror or shadow character in storytelling.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a great question because, honestly, when I was writing it, I was just so deep into it. The idea I think with storytelling, and this is something that, we try to teach our students at UCLA. It's like, you know, yes, there are theories. There are tons of screenwriting books out there who tell you, okay, yeah, this is where your power dynamics are coming. This is what you need to do with your protagonist and antagonist, all that type of stuff. But, all these sort of prescriptive notions or formulas or algorithms, there's something that, sort of look back after the film is done and people try to analyze it, if you try to implement that approach in creating something from scratch, you're going to get tied up because it may not be what the story needs. And it will kind of suck the energy out of the room if you try to follow, any sort of prescribed format, So,
Hmm.
I will say the flashback structure, I put in so many sharks was the result of, okay, well, the idea of just two guys, Buddy and Guy, talking in a room for like, 45 minutes for half the movie just doesn't seem very cinematic. So I deliberately broke it up into this flashback structure to sort of break up, the idea of just two guys talking in a room,
Hmm.
But, the flow and the rhythm of it was dictated by, sort of, just being in the characters' heads as you're writing. I mean, I know it sounds like a really hippy dippy, sort of like magical thing. Is like, look, if you're really invested in your characters and you know your characters, at some point when you sit down and write, the characters do all the talking for you. They really do. You'll
Yeah.
just thing, and then all of a sudden it's like you'll look up and it's like, oh my God, I've got 5 pages down, and you go back and read it, and it's like, this is amazing. Yeah, you won't even have recognized that you have done it yourself. And I find
Wow.
that's when the best work is done. It's the same way with the acting. This is why actors love to, work with directors who will direct them, because a good actor will always be in the moment. Once the cameras roll and from that from action to cut, they are transported into their character in the world. They have no idea what they did. And so once you go cut, they'll actually look at you, go, what happened? Yeah, it's always that was this weird out of body experience. They don't know what they did because they
Yeah.
became a character. They were in that moment. They were so focused, and you like, you give them, it's like, well, you got to pick the coffee cup, with your left hand or right hand. They go, I picked up a coffee cup. I did that when, yeah. So, the good actors are just so dialed in. And
Yeah.
with writing, you need to get to that place too, where you're
Mhm.
just so dialed in with your characters and the story almost unfolds in front of you as if you were a viewer. That requires a lot of preparation, a lot of work beforehand. You have to do a lot of your research. You have to do a lot of thinking as to, what is the story really? What is it that I want to say? What is it about myself that I want to put in there? So you do have to kind of answer those questions for yourselves. You can't just sit down and write and go, okay, well, by page 30, I know that, Guy, the assistant, needs to take Buddy hostage. Can't think like that. You just have
Yeah.
to write the story and let it unfold at its natural pace.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're gonna feel, a lot of scripts that I read feel, a little sort of paper thin, because I can feel the writer trying to hit these sort of like benchmarks that we've been taught to by, books and, other sort of masters of screenwriting. And it's like, okay, by page 30, you need to have your first act break. By page 90, you need to have your second act break. That doesn't compute anymore. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense anymore, especially
Yeah.
this day and age when, there've been so many movies made, so many stories told, that trying to adhere to this formula makes the movie seem formulaic. And so, yeah, so, I encourage all my students, every writer I talk to, is just tell the story your own way, Yeah, you'll figure it out. Yeah. So
Interesting. Yeah. I agree because once you become locked into what you're writing, it's almost like you're on autopilot. You just like read it
exactly.
and it comes
Yep.
naturally. Even
Yeah.
for acting as well, I think it's very similar.
Well, the first thing I've learned is trust your actors. So your actor can take what you think is the worst, most horrible line ever written and turn it into something that's really profound. You know what I mean? So that is what good acting can do for badly written dialogue. Or, and the thing is, like, as writers, we tend to be very hard on ourselves, very judgmental about our work. So, it may not have been a bad line to begin with. So, so again, trust your actors. B, read your scripts out loud after you've, written them,
Oh
because,
yeah.
yeah, once you read them out loud, those clunker lines and the bad lines and the lines that are like, that's only in there to, like, do some exposition. Is there a way to tell that, in a more artful way? So yeah, once you read something out loud and hear it, then it will point out a lot of the sort of the weaknesses and what you've been doing. So yeah, so
Yeah.
there's things. Yeah, so yeah, read it out loud. But then also trust that everyone that you're going to be working with on a movie set, they're going to be doing everything they can to make your story better. And if there is, and a lot of them, yeah, will come to you and say, hey, George, can we say this a different way? This sounds like really, really bad. And so yeah, so just be open to everyone's creative contribution.
I've experienced that a lot because
Yeah.
sometimes when I am really focused on writing a script, I
Right.
then, look at it after and I'm reading it out loud. I'm like, this does not make sense.
Right.
What am I
Yeah.
writing?
Exactly.
Um,
So you do have to, yeah, take the time out, read it, read it from beginning to end, and yeah, it'll track, track better. That being said, sometimes you do have to write the clunky lines, the lines that are pure exposition, like, oh, well, when I was 9 years old, I had this incident, and because, and because of that, that's the way I am, what we call backstory, you know. A lot of times, movies will just cut that out, but, I tell my students, like, yeah, but if you cut it out in the first draft, when an actor gets it, they're not going to know what to play, So sometimes you just have to write it down and trust that the actor and director will find a way to make it work without those clunky lines. They're like,
yeah.
they're great stories like that. There's, a movie for a few dollars more where like, Clint Eastwood is asked by, this woman in the village, why are you doing this? And he gave this like, in the original script, there was this 2-page monologue about his whole past. And Clint Eastwood said, well, can I just say I knew someone like you once? And yeah, so yeah, that's a beautiful, elegant line. It tells you everything that you need to know about this character's backstory. But he would not have been able to come up with that if somebody had not written the 2-page monologue beforehand. So
Mm-hmm.
the actors need to know what to play and trust that in their close-up, they're going to signify all of that history, all of that emotional background, and be able to like do away with it in just one line. But if they don't know what the background was to begin with, they'll never be able to play it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like over time, you'll have something that you condense and you make
Exactly.
it more concise.
Exactly. You have to like, just at some point, like, okay, trust your actors, they're going to get it in the close-up, just in their eyes. They'll be able to convey all that past and history and trauma, whatever you want is that you want to write. But if you've not explained that to them, if you've not written it down, they're just shooting blanks in the dark. They have no idea, what am I trying to hit? But if you're very specific, oh, okay, yeah, here's the monologue of what happened to you when you were 9. You got locked in this basement. Yeah, yeah. So, sometimes you just have to write it out and be willing to throw it away.
Yeah. Also, when you write scripts, do you sometimes avoid putting in a lot of technical aspects like camera movements or
I I try to avoid that
yeah,
unless it's something very, very specific. If I'm trying to emphasize a point, then I'll say, camera, pushes in fast for an extreme close-up of this, because I want, the readers to understand, yes, this manhole cover doesn't seem all that interesting, but it is an important story point. Please make note of it. It will come back later. So I will use, you know, camera moves or specific technical aspects to sort of drill that in a little bit. But otherwise, I try to stay away from like, camera direction as much as possible because, even though I'm a director myself, I know that, as a writer, it's a different job. And the last thing you want to do is tell a director how to do their job.
yeah,
So
that's what
I
I
get,
hear all the
yeah,
time.
exactly. Don't tell an actor how to do their job. Don't tell the director how to do their job. Your story as a writer is to write down the story. Yeah, write down the story in as clean and efficient possible way that someone can sort of like, translate it into cinema.
Hmm.
Yeah, it didn't used to be like, look in the 40s and the 50s, like if you pick up any script that Alfred Hitchcock directed, it is all technical terms. It's like, camera starts on this and pulls back to reveal that and then moves in, Hitchcock is writing in every single camera move into the script because scripts at that time were a blueprint. Everyone was working under the studio system, so writers, directors, actors, they were all under contract. You didn't get to say, oh, well, I want to do this movie next. The studio would say, hey, Juliana, you're going to be working on this movie. Show up on Monday to this office. You didn't get to say it. And so, yeah, so scripts could afford to sort of be more blueprints. But then, around the 70s, 80s, it suddenly became the studio system sort of, fell apart. And now it became sort of like the idea of like, okay, I've got to write the script and then get everyone interested in it. So, it went from being a blueprint to almost a sales brochure. I've got to sell
Hmm.
a director and wanting to tell the story. I've got to sell an actor and wanting to be in this movie. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and nobody likes to sit around and read blueprints. You know what I mean? They're very dry, they're very technical, there's no fun. So the idea like, making a switch into telling a story in an almost conversational way that can, sort of express as much emotion as possible is what is going to get directors and actors and other people interested in making your movie.
Hmm. That makes
So it's
total
different
sense.
color
Yeah.
writing. Yeah. Mhm.